You are listening to the podcast of the Economic Society at George Mason University. The Economic Society is a registered student organization that is committed to guiding students, organizing events, and provoking discussion. I'm Carlos Borgert, president of the Economic Society and the host of this conversation.
All right, so with that, let's just get started. I'm going to start on a little soapbox here before we get into it. So, of all the members at the economics department here at Mason, I think that our guest for today, Garett Jones, is my favorite one because of how unique he is really within the department. Sometimes when someone's taking the approach that Mason does take, which is more Austrian focus, libertarian focus, they can get caught up in the utopian vision of a world of pure econ. And I think that Professor Jones here does not get caught up in that. And he sees the world as it is, not as he idealizes it. He's a realist. And that is something that I think is incredibly important for anyone who wants to work in economics and in the public policy sphere. And so for that reason, I'm pretty personally excited for this talk today. So into the formal bio. So Dr. Garett Jones is an associate professor of economics and the BB&T Professor for the Study of Capitalism at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University here. In addition to his academic work, he has served as economic policy advisor to former Senator Orrin Hatch and is a staff economist to the Joint Economic Committee of the U.S. Congress. He has 3 books. The first book, published in 2015, is entitled Hive Mind, How Your Nation's IQ Matters So Much More Than Your Own. Second book, published in 2020, is titled 10% Less Democracy, Why You Should Trust Elites a Little More and the Masses a Little Less. And he's a third book out this November that you see right here before us, called The Culture Transplant, How Migrants Make the Economies They Move to a Lot Like the Ones They Left. Professor Jones has appeared in C-SPAN's Washington Journal, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg Business Week, Fox Business, and the New York Times. He is everywhere. But tonight, this evening, he's with us.
I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure to speak to you.
So we can start off on a softball of where are you from and what brought you here to Northern Virginia?
Well, I was born and raised in Southern California, and was raised a good Mormon boy and went to BYU and had a great experience there. But while I was knocking doors as an LDS missionary one day, I decided I didn't believe in the faith. So I didn't just keep that quiet to myself and go on about my life the way a lot of people might. Instead, I decided to quit my mission. Went back to BYU, finished there, and eventually found my way both to Capitol Hill, interning for Senator Orrin Hatch, who was fantastic to work for, and got a PhD in economics at UC San Diego. So I spent a lot of years studying verbal stuff, history, majored in history, tried out a political science PhD, decided that I needed to go learn the math. And so when I went for an econ PhD, I picked the mathiest department I could get into. And after a first very good academic stint at Southern Illinois University Edwardsville, I was able to land the job of a lifetime at George Mason University, and I still can't believe that I get to work here every day.
So in your time at BYU and throughout your life, really, you've dedicated yourself to the pursuit of truth. And a lot of this has involved studying the classics and the great books of religion. Mm-hmm. So you studied the Torah, the Quran, and the Christian Bible.
Yeah.
So how does studying the fundamentals of all the main religion cause someone to become, would you describe yourself as a nihilist or a moral relativist?
I would say I'm a moral nihilist.
You're
I'm not a moral
nihilist.
relativist.
Okay.
I'm not relativistic about whether a man gives gifts to children at Christmas time, invisibly, mm-hmm. right? I'm not a relativist. I'm not like, well, if you believe it, that's good for you. You believe, no, I'm going to say this even though it's on YouTube. I am a Santa nihilist, right? I'm not a Santa relativist. And I feel the same way about morality. A lot of people have opinions about what they think an objective morality is like. I think that's about as valuable as debating what the true unicorn is like. People can talk about unicorns, they can write about unicorns. Unicorns don't exist. So, but studying the great faith, partly through the fantastic BYU Honors Education Program, they said, you got to study the classics, the global classics. And the Quran was part of that, and it was a fantastic experience. Reading it at a young age especially gives you a sort of foundation you can go back to. But just realizing that people have had to solve these moral problems and these problems of meaning and these problems of ultimate origins makes you realize that the questions that social scientists and historians have tried to address are really, they're fundamental to our inner being, like the drive to find answers to them is fundamental to our being. And people want an answer, so the demand for answers to fundamental questions far outstrips the supply of honest answers to those fundamental questions. So when the demand for something outstrips the supply, normally we expect the price of something to rise, right? But there's no real, price-oriented marketplace for ideas. So what is it that fills the gap between the very high demand for truth and the very low quantity supplied of truth? What fills that gap is bullshit. There's stories that we tell ourselves. They're fables. They're myths. They fill the gap between our demand to know the answers and the supply of true answers.
So you read the Chronicles of Narnia as an adult.
Yeah.
Written by C.S. Lewis, very Christian background.
Yes.
And so a lot of your delight that you got from that was recognizing the stories of Christianity that Lewis kind of included in the world of Narnia.
Yes.
How important do you think it is for religion to give us kind of a foundational lore for the world that we can recognize when it appears in random pieces of media?
I think it really helps because it lets you know that you're part of a broader story, that whatever debate somebody is having is part of some longer, more historic debate about right and wrong in our culture. Also, it's really important to just know what the cultural, like a whole lot of game theory teaches you, it was Deirdre McCloskey who said that the main insight of game theory is that there are too many equilibria. Right? There's just there are uncounted number of equilibria. In supply and demand, we're used to seeing there's just one time the lines cross, so there's only one equilibrium. Game theory, whatever, just to ridiculously oversimplify, whatever people want to believe as an equilibrium kind of can be. And faith-based narratives can often serve as these cultural touchstones, these focal points, these Schelling points, we might say, when people are trying to solve these big coordination problems in society. So realizing that they're so focal that people can come back to them easily, even if they've forgotten them for decades, or even if they didn't read this or that holy book when they were growing up. Zack Snyder, if he wants to just make an allusion to how Superman is a savior who's going to save us, he just has the guy spread out his arms, right? That's it, right? And then later, when you see the Pieta in another movie that totally does a knockoff of the Pieta, these are cultural reference points that let us know, it's noble when someone who is incredibly superpowered sacrifices for the group, and we hope others will do that in the future. And this is a cultural focal point that we keep sharing, and so we can kind of rely on others to draw upon that. So A, focal points exist. B, it helps to be reminded of them. C, if you know what the focal points are, you kind of can know how you're being gamed by the culture around you.
So what do you think is kind of the foundation of the Western world, if we call it? Because you're someone who's spent a lot of time studying that and reading through all of that.
Yeah, I really think Strauss is right, Leo Strauss, that, and as many others have pointed out as well, that Western civilization is a debate between Athens and Jerusalem, right? And so we have the monotheistic set of moral views that combined with a kind God, right? So you have a reasoned world that you can understand because there's a kind God who would like to help you find your way through it. On the other hand, you have the Roman, the Athenian worldview, which is we need to figure this out for ourselves, partly because the gods are capricious and not very nice, and we're not sure they're telling us the truth anyway. So we need to really reason this out. And that debate between Athens and Jerusalem is part of our intellectual worldview. Part of our material worldview, though, comes from the Roman approach, which is left out of, I think, a lot of philosophical thinking. The Roman approach was like, we don't really need to know what works, let's just go and do it. I mean, Roman engineering was a lot of just trial and error. it was the same kind of trial and error, as far as we can tell, the same kind of trial and error that, say, Thomas Edison was using in his R&D shop, right? He just had a lot of people in his lab using fairly prudent ways to try out like dozens, maybe it was hundreds of kinds of filaments to find something that would work well for an electric light bulb. And ultimately his didn't end up actually dominating the field. But that Roman willingness to just tinker with reality is something that's been part of the Western world as well. And so the philosophers will tell you it's Athens versus Jerusalem, but the materialists, I think, will point out that that engineering mindset of the Romans of just trying something and seeing if it works is a lot of what's made the West successful and gave us a head start with both good and very evil things in that world conquest that started around 1500.
So Rome back then, that was the greatest civilization of human history up until that point, and then for many, many centuries afterwards.
One could compare. It's a little hard to tell. Like, Chinese material civilization was quite advanced around that era as well. So, but the expansiveness of Rome into other cultural spheres is what's really impressive.
So at one point, it was this huge, gigantic power controlling the Mediterranean. And then flash forward a couple hundred years, just raided over and over again.
Yeah, and a reminder that Western civilization is not a hardy weed, right? Yeah. It can collapse.
Do you think it forgot itself and it forgot the factors that made it Rome in the first place, or did it lose them somehow?
One question at this point is like, was the inner Gibbon, Edward Gibbon, who wrote Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, was he telling the truth where he said that the collapse of the West was the triumph of Christianity and barbarism, right? It's hard to tell how much. It's plausible that the very radical forms of Christianity that were popular in the first couple of centuries played an important material role in helping the West collapse. It's still hard to tell, right? Even centuries later, because without controlled experiments, all of our knowledge is mediocre, right? Historians love to give you stories about we know what caused this or that. Without an experiment, we really don't know. I don't know what the counterfactual is. So many pieces were moving. There's a famous German list of causes of the decline of the Roman Empire, and it's all in German, right? And you can look it up online. It's like 2 pages of stuff, right? Is it lead in the pipes? Is it Christianity? Was it the barbarians? Was it barbarians? Was it people from the south, people from the north? Just unbelievable numbers of lists of possibilities. So I don't think that, the inability to carry on the knowledge was crucial. I don't know precisely what led to that happening, but the inability to sort of keep a vibrant intellectual culture where there were enough people with time, money, curiosity to just keep tinkering and engineering with the material world around them. That's the fall of the Roman Empire from a macroeconomist perspective, right? It's that loss of total factor productivity growth, that loss of innovation. So people still don't know for sure what the concrete was in the Roman Empire. So, and we've got some, right? So
can't replicate it.
Yeah.
Where do you think, so you mentioned kind of like centers of productivity, centers of tinkering and engineering.
Yeah.
These days, a lot has been said about like the exodus from San Francisco, which many people regard as being the center of innovation for the United States and really the world. Do you think that there's claims to that, or like has innovation really spread out into the internet, or is it still going to be centralized somewhere?
San Francisco's rise was basically an offshoot of Silicon Valley's rise, right? People moved to, like all the real technical progress was happening in Silicon Valley, and then once internet commerce became important enough, you could put a lot of butts in offices in San Francisco high-rises and get a lot of that work done there. So the importance of San Francisco for decades has always been Silicon Valley adjacent. And if people really needed that to be close by to Silicon Valley, you can move south, right? You can go live in Vacaville. It's a nice place. My friend had a house there. You can go to Gilroy, which is the garlic capital of the world. Maybe it's about as far south of Silicon Valley as San Francisco's north. So if mere adjacency is important, the invisible hand would find a way to create that, I think. So I think, it does appear that, a lot of affluent folks would like to find ways out of Silicon Valley, out of San Francisco. San Francisco's not building enough, so, you've got the same NIMBY problem that exists in so many other big cities. So I keep running into great people who are in Austin, Texas. You keep hearing about Miami. The internet is going to make a lot of relocations optional. The question is, but it does appear that people still want to live in cities, especially that sort of upper middle class to upper class elite, because cities are more fun to live in. So, as somebody put it on Twitter the other day, if you don't have to commute to work every day, cities are actually a nice place to live.
That's pretty good. So one part of like San Francisco and like tech culture that you interact with a lot is the Rune Circle on Twitter.
Yes, yeah.
And
I was an early adopter when it came to Rune.
You were an early adopter.
Yeah,
you
totally
were
an early adopter.
First 10,000.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
And then you.
That's ROON if you're looking for him. So.
Oh, look him up. It's great.
Yeah.
And you've stated your intentions to attend kind of the annual gathering for that circle of Twitter called Vibe Camp.
Yeah, I'm excited to go to Vibe Camp. So.
Why are you excited? Why do you like interacting with them so much?
These are people who are, some of whom are actually going to change the world that exists even after I'm gone. And I just like to get a glimpse of a certain slice of the future, right? Internet culture has created quite a few interesting communities where people who do great things at work have found ways to share parts of their work mindset online and build a community around that. And it's been fantastic to watch this. It didn't, to my knowledge, it didn't exist or it wasn't visible to me when I was younger. And so something like Vibe Camp is sort of, a sort of Burning Man for internet nerds. And to me, I'm just crassly interested in watching like how a certain slice of a great culture does stuff. There are other reasons to go. They're just interesting people some of whom have great social skills, some of whom turn out to be socially awkward in person, even though they're great online. And just watching the incubator element of this, the hothouse element of this for a couple of days is going to be interesting as well. So, yeah, just watching cultures blossom and innovate is great. And these are new things, right? This isn't the same old. This isn't the same old like reading circle or reading salons of the 17 and 1800s, right? This is technology opening up new kinds of groups to find each other.
Okay. So how long do you think like new centers of like groups of people of culture and innovation can rise before the old power holders start to take aim at them? In this case, people who exist here in DC. Every new like industry, it rises, people cheer them on for a long time, and then politicians in DC take notice and start to think, they shouldn't have this power, the government should have this power.
Oh yeah, so the version of this, of course, has been happening in the world of cryptocurrency, right? And some of this is, there is a certain element though, where once an organization gets big enough, people want, even the people who are key participants in it would like there to be standardized norms of behavior. And sometimes the government is the simplest way to guarantee those standardized norms. I don't know what the critical number is, right? When cultures are small and unpopular, like nobody worries about like the right to join it, right? But once it becomes lucrative and becomes $1 trillion industry, then people are like, oh, you have to make sure that like all my favorite groups are represented in there, right? Nobody cared about whether there were strong egalitarian norms and strong fairness norms about the nerdy computer clubs that existed in Silicon Valley in the 70s, right? I forget the names of some of these groups, but once you've got an industry, then everybody cares about fairness norms, and there is something material about this, right? Like that large organizations should have standardized rules of entry and exit, and people care about that. So again, it's the mixture of money, influence, where either politicians will want it. I mean, that's the way you framed it, but I just think I've just noticed it happen enough where the organization itself wants it. So, and we're seeing it happen over the last 18 months or so, quite verbally in the world of cryptocurrency, where the call for some kind of standardized norms seems to be important, so that the people who have some people have some oligopolistic power are thinking, wow, a lot of these small players who are bad actors, they're like hurting the reputation of all of us. Like they're maybe 4% of the market, they're 5% of the market, but their poor behavior is tarnishing all of us. So why can't we just have somebody enforce some rules so that this 4 or 5%, I'm just guessing at the number, of bad actors, of fraudsters, why should I let them create negative externalities that have influenced the rest of us? Right? So this is always the question of every society, right? There's a small number of people, create a bunch of negative externalities, ruin it for everybody else. And so the hegemons start saying, how can we cut down on negative externalities? Mm-hmm. You can think of this, what I'm thinking through in my head here is, this is the story of every city ever, right? City starts small, people are like, yeah, do what you want, everything's fine. Mm-hmm. And then once it gets big enough, people are like, wow, we really need to, now that we're really crowded, I really do worry about noise at 2 in the morning. We need a cop to solve that.
Do you think a state is inevitable?
State-like apparatuses are.
Okay.
So, and the funny thing is, a lot of anarcho-capitalists tacitly agree with me on this, right? There's 2 rules of extreme libertarianism. One is that public spheres should be totally unregulated and you should be able to do whatever you want there. Part 2 of extreme libertarianism is there should be no public spaces. And in those public spaces, you can have whatever rules you want, right? In other words, you can have, if you want, a state, right, that has godlike power over everything that happens there. So, and that's not a coincidence. I mean, there's a reason why many libertarians will think of, say, point to Disneyland and say that, or a cruise ship, and treat that as a model of anarcho-capitalism, of private law. And they are. And those places are not, they're not bedlam, and they are not what normal people would think of as anarchy. They are not places of public debauchery, right? They're places that are extremely regulated. The most anarcho-capitalistic places in the world have degrees of regulation that are more extreme than many states. Mm-hmm. And I think, and that's because there's consumer demand for this, right? It's that the vast majority of customers are willing to pay for something if they know that a small number of bad actors are not going to be able to ruin it for them. Mm-hmm. So I think this is a question for liberals, people who think of themselves as cosmopolitan liberals have to really think through, right? I think of myself as a cosmopolitan liberal by and large. And I have to recognize the fact that every time people are allowed to build their own free societies, their own free states with their own rules on something like private property, that doesn't look like cosmopolitan liberalism. That's not the equilibrium. Mm-hmm. So,
a lot of people cite being drawn to libertarianism through studying economics and realizing that the market is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, invisible hand theorem is great. Yeah.
So, but as someone who did work in government yourself, how do you reconcile having libertarian tendencies as well as the need for a state?
Well, I mean, I'd say part of it is that, working in government didn't change things all that much in a way. I didn't expect it to be perfect. I didn't expect it to be totally perfect or totally terrible. But I think the way I think about it more than that we need a state, it's that there is little to be gained in moving from a sort of neoliberal, moderate libertarianism that a lot of, say, the neoliberal types embrace, versus the equilibrium that I think would occur in an anarcho-capitalist utopia where people really did have freedom of movement between places. You would end up seeing kind of similar sorts of norms. So I'd say there's little to be, at least across the rich countries, there's little to be gained from dramatic steps in the direction of anarcho-capitalism or very extreme minarchism. Mm-hmm. Like, if somebody created an extreme minarchist state, almost nobody would live there. Mm-hmm. So the people would vote with their feet and say, no, I'm actually going to go live in Denmark instead.
That's a common critique of libertarianism, of if it's so successful, why has there never been a libertarian society? Yeah,
one answer is there are a ton of them, and we do live in anarcho-capitalist utopia. There was a great web page that did this back in the 90s. It was in very crude HTML that pointed out that basically we do have perfect competition for in an anarcho-capitalist utopia. There are 180 countries in the world, and people vote with their feet to move between them, right? And that's about as much competition as you could hope for in the real world. I mean, of course, it's a bit of a joke to put it that way, but there's very little reason to believe that the anarcho-capitalist free market state would generate rules that are libertarian. I think that's the real message here, is that like people choosing to build a free society on their own that was of at least moderate scale, 10, 20, 30 million people, they would settle on a set of contracts that would end up looking a lot like, Northern Europe. That's my hunch.
All right.
Yeah.
Interesting. How do you think, so something that we've been like studying as like in the Economic Society this month is translating economic theory into public policy.
Yeah.
What do you think muddies that process, where there is this one like great economic theory, and under this light, everything should function this way, but when the sausage gets made, it looks a lot different than the theory says it should?
Well, I mean, let me think of an example where like the policy, where the real world hasn't matched up with sort of Econ 101 in a very neat way, and that's the minimum wage, right? It's pretty obvious that like, a $50 an hour minimum wage would have a lot of bad things to a lot of people. And yet after decades of research into the effects of pretty sizable minimum wage increases, you see like modest declines in employment, right? And so I think this is a weakness. I am persuaded by the line of evidence that says that big increases in the minimum wage, the reason we don't see big quantity effects in hiring is because incumbent firms don't just fire a bunch of people immediately. It's basically, that really is just, you are able to successfully rent seek from the owner of the business if it's a one-time big increase in the minimum wage. But where it does show up is in the growth rate of new firms. So so in other words, there's a longer run effect, I suspect, that's harder to detect. And it shows up in the price of goods, it shows up in the quality of goods, it shows up in the kinds of industries, and it's hard to, like, this is just a story I'm telling you, right? I don't have the evidence for this, but I do know that people act rationally along multiple dimensions. So in a way, I'm sounding like von Mises, right? I'm like, man acts, and therefore a minimum wage is going to have bad effects in the long run, right? That's like, it's ridiculous for me to say it like that. But all those little channels, A, have to work. B, I see this detective work showing that it's taking a while, that it does seem to show up in growth rates rather than levels. But C, I think this points to a weakness of the experimental method that exists both in medicine and in economics. The rise of the demand for natural experiments or experimental methods in econ really pushes us toward judging treatments that can be measured through experiments. And generally what that means, for instance, is looking at short-run effects, like 1-2 years, right? How long can you keep people? How long are you going to trust the results you get from some randomized experiment about tax differences in one state versus another, or minimum wage changes in one state versus another? Like, you're not going to believe those results for 20 years from a 1-year natural experiment. So the same thing is going on in the world of medicine, right? In the world of medicine, we get randomized treatment for certain kinds of medicines, where placebo versus control group. You can check things for a couple of years, and that's what you can learn about. You know what you can't do randomized control experiments with? Surgery. You just can't. You can't say like, oh, we're gonna remove your tumor. Like, half the people get their tumor removed and half people don't. Or we're gonna try this new method on some people and not others that's less invasive. And like, so there's large areas of medical research that aren't subject to experimental methods. So I think the rise of experimental economics, the rise of the quest for natural experiments, the identification police, some dose of that is good, but we should not limit ourselves to things that can only be known through natural experiments. Like, I wish, I treat that as an ideal, but I know that we can't run these for the things we care about. And so that means we're driven back to micro foundations, to stories, towards stories that we kick the tires on repeatedly. This is what Robert Lucas talked about this in his methodological work when he writes about methodology, Nobel laureate. And he keeps saying this, stories are basically all we have. And so we have to kick the tires on our stories. That's our way to learn. Experiments have changed that much, but not enough. So policy world, the policy world should be ecumenical in its forms of persuasion, and that means both economic and non-economic methods.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as being the incentive structure for politicians? Like, do they have a duty to their constituents, to themselves, or to a higher ideal? Or what is the mix?
Steve Levitt did a study on this when he was quite young, and I don't think what he found really hasn't been beaten much since, which is that to a first approximation, people running for re-election, people running for office in Congress seem to be driven about 1/3 by the quest for re-election, 1/3 by what their party wants in Congress, other members of their own party, trying to please your home team, basically, and 1/3 just residual, right? You could call that free will if you wanted to, right? You could call it ideals if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. You could call it pandering to lobbyists in ways that are very difficult to detect. Politicians in the U.S. really want to get reelected to high office. There's just a ton of evidence for this. And part of the reason you should believe it is because if they were motivated by something else, they'd quickly get voted out of office and replaced by someone who wanted reelection. So this quest is really strong. Fortunately for politicians, they only really have to pay attention to what the voters want about a year before the election, because voters can barely remember anything before that. So the irrationality of voters, the sort of forgetfulness of voters, helps politicians it gives them some freedom. But in an election year, politicians are really focused on what the voters want. Mm-hmm. When you like that, you call it democratic accountability. When you don't like it, you call it pandering. Right? Oh, they're pandering to the voters. Oh, they're being accountable to the voters. They're paying attention to the will of the people. Which language you use, you choose that based on whether you like what they're picking. Mm-hmm. But yeah, in the U.S., it's watching so many Democrats come out in favor of drilling for oil everywhere just a couple months before the election, just a reminder of this, right? So, yeah. It's a different part. Watching in 2020 as all the Republicans push for massive checks being sent to everyone in America, right? Mm-hmm. The same thing, right? Election years, it's if you're a fan of democracy, you should be very proud that they're abandoning their principles in order to give the voters what they want. Right? I mean that unironically. If you're a fan of democracy, you should be pleased when politicians abandon their ideals in order to give the voters what the voters want. Mm-hmm.
You have a book called 10% Less Democracy.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty fair to characterize you're not as big a fan of democracy as probably other people are.
Yeah, and I don't idealize it in the sense of, what the cure for the problems of democracy is to have more democracy. Mm-hmm. The thing that we euphemistically call democracy in the modern U.S. and in the rich countries is actually really quite good. It's representative democracy with a lot of oligarchical elements. A lot of oligarchical elements. If Aristotle were here, he would not call us a democracy, right? He was pretty clear about this. He thought that even having judges with 1 or 2 year terms was oligarchical. And we appoint judges for life. Mm-hmm. So he would have thought that was extremely oligarchical. Mm-hmm. So this blend of democracy and oligarchy that we call democracy, Aristotle probably would have called it politeia. That seems to be a pretty good mix, and getting the balance right between listening to the voters and not listening to voters is important. I saw this in the Senate, and that's part of what inspired the book, because on the Hill, you always see how senators behave totally differently when they're 2 years away from re-election. Mm-hmm. Senators in the U.S. have 6-year terms, so that means the first 4 years they can act like a statesman, and the last 2 years they have to act like a pandering politician. And there's been some statistical work that shows that, for instance, senators are a lot more likely to vote for free trade deals when they're in statesman mode, 2 to 6 years out, and they're less likely to vote for free trade deals when they're 0 to 2 years out. So,
mm-hmm. What does it take to be a successful politician here in the country? They have to have the capacity to handle a lot of pain in terms of you're getting attacked all the time, or you're always going to be traveling, you're always going to be fundraising.
Yep, thick skins are part of this, yeah.
And you also have to have a certain kind of craziness about you to think, do you know who should be running this country? Me. I should be running this country.
Yeah. There's a certain kind of hubris you have to have in order to just get out there and do this, right? The old saying, the old saying is that every senator wakes up in the morning, looks in the mirror, and says the same thing. Good morning, Mr. President. So it's weird because only like 2 senators have gotten to do that in like the last while, right?
Yeah.
So, but in any case, yeah. So it requires a kind of hubris. It requires a kind of thick skin. When I was working on the Hill and I noticed the difference between academics and politicians, they both have huge egos, but the politicians just have much thicker skins, right? Academics they get picked on like in a paper or something. They don't have to confront it too much. Unless they're at University of Chicago and you're giving a seminar, then it's tough apparently. So, but also politicians have to, in democracies, have to work through addition, right? You've got to choose policies that build a coalition and only alienate people if absolutely necessary. So Ken Shepsley at Harvard talks about this in his textbook that I signed. Mo Fiorina talks about this as well. That basically one thing the politicians quickly learn is that, if you have a choice between a policy that pleases just about everybody in your district and a policy that alienates 40% for some partisan purpose, you're going to pick the thing that helps just about everybody in the district. So this is one argument for why pork is so popular. Bringing home like a VA hospital or a freeway overpass to your district, I mean, nobody in your district is actually going to be upset about that, right? Whereas if you take a position on something that even has 50, 60% popularity in your district, you might be making a whole bunch of enemies who might be fighting against you next time. So this is part of the reason why a lot of people in the House in particular can act a lot like local politicians. It's very transactional. They don't want to stick their head up unless they need to. They're always looking for ways to make a coalition bigger rather than taking a strong position. And you notice that one way you see this in politics is that each side, when each side makes fun of the other, I'm not talking about what that talking heads on TV do, right? That's a different thing. When you talk about when House Democrats make fun of Republicans, they're usually not making fun of the median Republican and certainly not the marginal Republican, right? They're picking the 5 craziest people on the other side, and they keep saying those names 5, 10, 20 times more than all the other names combined. And the Republicans do the same thing, right? I mean, the squad on the Democratic side is doing a huge favor for the whole rest of the Democratic conference, right? They're taking the heat. 4 people are taking the heat for 220 some odd members of the House, right? All those other names never get mentioned, right? And those 4 people the squad is in very safe districts, right? They can raise a lot of money. It's great for them. So each side has their, it's irrational for each side to pick the most extreme members of the other side as the targets of their attacks, because part of your goal in politics is to win through addition whenever possible. So you don't want to alienate a Democrat doesn't want to alienate the moderate Republican too much, and certainly doesn't want to alienate any liberal Republicans, because those are all potential voters. Somebody might co-sign on a bill with you. But it's safe for you to pick on the person who's at the first percentile of democraticness. Safe bet. So yeah, coalition building is at the heart of any kind of parliamentary style politics.
Do you think there's kind of moral trade-offs that you have to make with that too, in terms of associating yourself with maybe people that personally you'd rather not associate with? Is that worthwhile? Yeah,
but I often wonder what percentage of politicians actually have much sort of core morality on those kind of things. I mean, they don't like killing children, right? I mean, there's basic things. But they learn, I think they learn quickly that you've just got to make deals with people to get things done. And I mean, if you're passing bills through either unanimous consent or voice votes, you're often having to put in a lot of things that help the other side just to sort of grease the wheels and make the thing happen. So each party, for instance, every year when appropriations bills are getting pushed out, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's just been kept in for decades. And if you wanted to launch a fight about it, you could, right? But there's going to be some things that your team hates, and there's going to be some stuff the other team hates, but you just let it go through on a voice vote. So, and there probably is some element behind it where you just don't want your staff to tell you about the things that are in there that you just don't. But yeah, I think that's the way politics, democratic politics has to work, a lot of it works through soft consensus. And that means deciding certain things just aren't moral issues for you. Yeah. I've often wondered, this is one of my pet questions, what percentage of people in elected office, at high office in the U.S., actually secretly agree with the other party on just about everything. But they're like, well, this is just my job. I'm just like an actor in a movie. I'm saying the lines in the movie. I don't have to believe them. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think it's more likely that they just don't believe much of anything, or they just don't think about it too much. Kind of like a lot of people in marriages, right? They're like, once you've been in for 10 years, you're like, I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to say, like, is this the best person for me? I'm just sticking with it. Mm-hmm. If I keep revisiting it every day, it's just going to make my life worse.
Mm-hmm. So when people start saying, like, we have to balance the government budget because there's so much pork barrel in there, it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
You think that there's a case to be made for having some pork barrel in there because it greases the wheels.
Yeah, pork is a way of building coalitions, and getting marginal votes. So, for instance, if you're in the Democratic Party right now in the House, you need 218 votes to pass anything in the House. You've got 220 some odd members in the House who are Democrats. One way the Democrats can get things done is by getting those most moderate Democrats to vote for a bill, is by offering them some extra pork. This is part of the sort of argument for Congress as parties as cartels. So the average Democrat has to say, the only way we can count to 218 is if we really help out our moderates. And we want to pass some stuff that's pretty left-wing. Mm-hmm. And it's going to hurt those moderates back home. So what can we do to help those moderate seats? The answer is, if we're going to pass a left-wing thing, we need to throw in some pork to help our moderate Democrats get reelected. Same thing when the Republicans are in power. If they want to pass some super conservative thing that's going to alienate their like 5 remaining liberal Republicans, those liberal Republicans, you can pretty safely bet, are getting a lot of pork back home. I saw a version of this when I was in the Senate, like John Breaux of Louisiana. He was one of the last conservative Democrats serving in the Senate. And he milked the Democrats for all of the lobbying, all of the pork barrel stuff he could for Louisiana, right? Mm-hmm. Like, he knew they needed his vote. And he was really great at it, and he was proud of it, right? It's like, I'm helping Louisiana. Pork, when you're helping your own district, that's not selling out. That's helping your district, right? Mm-hmm. So pork barrel projects are a small amount of budget anyway, right? Okay. You all know that, like, the U.S. government is basically a huge insurance program with a military attached. Like, that's what costs. That's the cost of government. So. Mm-hmm.
That's something that's generated some controversy recently. Some members of the Republican caucus have been saying that they're going to be wanting to raise the age limit to Medicare, Medicaid, or like the qualifications. Is that something that's just going to be inevitable? Is it has to get done, and so this is just the time we're going to have to do it?
No. Another possibility is that we turn Medicare, which is the retirement program that you get when you're 65, whether that basically just remains almost ceremonial health care at some point, right? If you keep the if you reimburse doctors at a sufficiently low level, fewer and fewer doctors will sign on to taking Medicare patients, and so the government can say we have officially government health care for everyone, but in practice, almost all elderly people, or an increasing percentage of them, would end up just doing pure private medicine, paying out of pocket or paying for their own private insurance. Mm-hmm. Some Americans will just choose to work longer so they can get some kind of coverage. So there are really multiple dimensions to work along when it comes to long-term budget problems. Raising the retirement age is one way to do this, but other ways are to basically just find ways to degrade the quality of services to the point that it's merely ceremonial coverage. I mean, there's unfortunately, this is true, the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. Medicaid is for the poor, and the key difference between that and Medicare is that the reimbursement rates are just lower for the doctors. So you would expect, you know enough economics to know what's going to happen. Which doctors are going to sign up for Medicaid versus those that sign up for Medicare? It's safe to bet from just economic theory that doctors who sign up for Medicaid, on average, not in every case, will tend to be lower quality doctors, or they might not see as many patients. So there are a lot of ways that you can ration, that the invisible hand can ration a product when it's when the price is kept artificially low. Mm-hmm. And one is just, so if Medicare could become more like Medicaid as time goes on. who knows? Maybe we'll have, as more than one person has pointed out, if we can find a pill that cures diabetes, that wipes out our entire government healthcare budget spending problem forever. Mm-hmm. Right? There's a case for the technological fixes to a lot of this.
Yeah. I think there's I think there's a pill these days that reduces body weight by 20%. I think.
So we'll see if that holds up. If these kind of changes, if they happen, if they stick, could solve a lot of our current healthcare problems, right? Mm-hmm. So technological innovation is, as usual, the thing that can fix everything.
So right now we're sort of a week and a half away from midterms.
Yeah.
A lot of the conversations that we see in the news talking about Democrats are outspending Republicans in key districts, Republicans are outspending Democrats here, everyone's trying to fundraise. You think that doesn't really matter at all? That's something you tell to all of your classes.
Yeah.
If it doesn't really matter, why do people, like so many seemingly smart people, spend so much time and so much energy talking about money and directing it?
Well, it's possible. Well, one thing is that it's a leading indicator, right? Mm-hmm. Baby strollers don't cause childbirth, but they certainly help predict it. And so if you're trying to figure out if your friend's pregnant mm-hmm. and your friend isn't telling you, you just check and see if they're, shopping for strollers, right? Yeah. That's one way to tell. So the forecasting element is useful. It's a sign of sort of interest. It's a sign of whether the market thinks this person's going to win. Mm-hmm. Another factor is that money matters a little bit, right? On average, money matters a little bit. And so in a country as big as the U.S., where there are 435 House races every year, it'll end up being decisive. The last-minute money will end up being decisive in maybe one or two, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that point. The third point that I will make is a David Shore point, the political analyst, democratic socialist. His theory, his pet theory, which is probably right, is that there's huge money would matter if it were spent wisely, but there's a huge amount of pressure to spend it unwisely. So basically, if you spend it on television in pivotal districts where television advertising rates are cheap, then money matters. That's his story. But people running for office in California, they really want advertisements, even though it's expensive. So that money is the same dollar amount is going to buy far fewer ads and move far fewer votes than an ad in rural Kansas. Mm-hmm. So another story that I just saw some professionals discussing on Twitter is that just last week, for why money doesn't matter, is that there's huge pressure to tell your donors that you spent their money. If you say, you gave me, my supporters gave me $2 million, and I read the scientific research that said this money won't matter, so I'm not going to spend the money, it makes your donors not trust you. You're worried about these 1 in a million chances that you lose, and then you have to go back to them and say, I didn't spend the money because I read a scientific study that said the money didn't matter, right? So basically there's a kind of loss aversion, and how will I deal with the horror of loss and the 1 in 20 chance that I lose unjustly? Mm-hmm. So, that these tail effects really might be driving a lot of these outcomes.
Interesting.
But if you can find a way to advertise in districts with cheap rates and where the race is kind of close, then money probably matters.
Okay. But
that's not much of the advertising.
Interesting.
You end up paying for a bunch of activists who sit around all day on their smartphones writing text for a home page that nobody's ever going to read. Right? Well, I paid them $200,000 a year for that. So.
Oh, that's nice. So one way the Congress has evolved a lot since the 70s and the 80s is that power has become more centralized in leadership and mm-hmm. less so in committees. Mm-hmm. Is that an example of 10% less democracy going in a good way, or is that maybe 20% less democracy and that's too much?
Yeah, this there a lot of stuff does go through regular order in the committees, but you're right. Leadership has become a lot more powerful. It's a lot like the same things happened in the White House after. From the Great Depression onward, especially with World War II. There does seem to be some element where leadership wants to aggregate information in a way that we economists would think of the invisible hand doing, right? Mm-hmm. But because in politics you don't have well-functioning markets and political deals, the leadership can end up acting as a de facto forum for haggling, working out the semi-Kosian bargains between all the different factions. So negotiating's hard, and centralizing it seems to be one way to fix it. So,
Nice.
yeah, I think working in leadership has got to be there's a lot of interesting power politics there that I wish I could see up close. So
Interesting. Well, we'll see. I had something. What did I have? Why are DC people boring?
Oh, yeah. The reason DC people are boring is because they always have to maintain a bland enough edge, a sort of soft enough appearance, inoffensive enough appearance, so that they can always work with the next person, right? Having a strong edge, having a strong personality, might make it harder for you to get along with the next person at your potential next job. And so being inoffensive and smooth-edged is a way of maintaining your political viability within the system. And basically making it possible for you to move over the course of your career, right? If you establish a brand as having like 7 certain views, then if you offend somebody on any of those 7 views, you're unemployable, and they're whole part of DC. So yeah, strong views make you they are barriers to your future successful negotiations. So DC people end up being extraordinarily bland. I'd say it's particularly true compared to New York City people, right? In New York, if you think about finance and advertising, those are fields where having a strong view and being known for having that particular strong view has a lot of upside. And so people there are more willing to take that risk of, I'm the person who does X. I'm the person who does this kind of ad. I'm the person who follows this kind of trading strategy. And having that brash brand works better in a market-driven system where one good idea can attract capital. But since democratic politics works through addition, you're always needing to basically keep yourself bland enough that you can build a bigger coalition for your Kosian bargain. That might be one way to think about it, is that Kosian bargaining type situations will favor blandness. And entrepreneurial capital type situations will favor focused, strong opinions.
What does it take to succeed in Washington then? Is it just keeping Kosian bargaining in mind at all times?
I'd say it's sort of the middle to upper levels is that you want to, it's always about keeping your options open, right?
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, in our age, we might think of Mitch McConnell as being somebody who's just amazing at this, right? Anybody who's been able to be or Nancy Pelosi in her own way, I can say of McConnell because I've seen more of the Senate side. But the way he just can talk a lot, he can talk a lot like Alan Greenspan, where he can talk for a long time and you feel like he hasn't said anything, right? He doesn't needlessly alienate people because he's got to keep a large coalition of people fairly happy. He can do a lot of things behind the scenes, right? All of his knives are inserted well off stage, which makes for bad drama, right? It makes for if all the action happens off stage in a movie, like off screen, you're like, well, this is a terrible movie, right? So that was one of the complaints about Thor: Love and Thunder, is like all of the stuff that Gore the God Butcher did was all of his God butchery happened off screen, so you never got to see it. So, but that's the way a lot of the best politics works, and most successful politics works, which is, Mitch McConnell is taking out his when he needs to ruin somebody's political career, he's doing it off screen. So, so it doesn't alienate people in his coalition.
What do you mean when you say like the secret is that there are no secrets? Is that one of like the no secrets? Yeah,
in politics, yeah, there really are no secrets. I tend to think, for instance, that intelligence agencies know very little that's well worth knowing. From people I've known who've had fairly high clearances, they say that they have seen very little in their time that was worth knowing. Senator Slade Gorton, in a interview, said he was on the Intelligence Committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee for a couple of years, and he went off it because it was just boring, nothing happened. And he said he was tired of finding every briefing that he heard discussed in the New York Times 2 days later. He didn't, you could say, oh no, he's really seeing all the stuff about the aliens and he's just not telling us. But I don't think that's what's happening. I think there's not that much stuff that's worth knowing.
Okay.
So, and I think this is true about political negotiations too. I was talking with a high-level politician who had worked in a gubernatorial administration, a high-level staffer, excuse me, I should say. And I was talking with her about like what she thought about political memoirs and whether they were accurate at presenting like politics as she saw it. And she says, yeah, I read a lot of these things. And yeah, I totally think that they're conveying what I see on a regular basis. And I never got to that highest levels like she did. But I, in my world, I'd say the same, is that if you carefully read good political memoirs, you know what's happening. You know the kind of things that are happening on a regular basis, right? That I suspect the same is broadly true in the world of intelligence. And so this is a reminder that what's going to help people if you want to understand these systems is you read a couple of these books just to kind of get a sense of how this secret world works, whether it's a business world or a political world or intelligence world. And then after that, what matters is the general laws of social science, right? All the game theory, all of the asymmetric information problems, all the untrustworthiness problems that human beings have. These hardy perennials. You can learn about that by studying economic theory. You can learn about it by studying Shakespeare, right? But after you learn the basic facts of how the institutions in your era work, your time is much better spent learning general findings from the social sciences to find out what people are like if you want to succeed in these organizations.
So we're kind of in a realignment right now, at least in terms of the Republican Party, part of, like, somewhat in the Democratic Party as well. The new right is coming on into the stage, and the MACCons, and they're disrupting everything. In this time of transition, the old gatekeepers have lost a lot of power. You see organizations like Americans for Prosperity and Heritage, and back in the day they used big names. Everyone loved them. But nowadays they aren't really as relevant anymore. Who is still left that has gatekeeping power?
Well, Heritage has moved in the direction of being Trumpy, but it's safe to say that they're more of a follower than a leader, I'd say, in that respect. This is a great question. On the GOP side, who actually has any kind of gatekeeping ability? I really couldn't tell you right now. That's actually a great point. I think this is probably made staffers a lot more entrepreneurial who are working in the House or the Senate on the GOP side. I mean, the Democrats can stick with their tried and true orgs, I think. My guess is this means staff are doing a lot more of keeping their ear to the ground and trying to learn which way the culture is moving. So this is me just idly speculating. But if the think tanks have really reduced their intermediary role, then that means that, say, influential pundits, influential columnists, influential bloggers, probably have much closer connection to key staffers and key members of Congress in terms of being able to influence them indirectly. So, I mean, I feel like I've been seeing this happening over the course of my lifetime as the rise of social media and independent blogging has grown, that there is an element of cutting out the middleman, and think tanks were always the middleman in the Washington, D.C. intellectual ecosystem. So now you can just go directly. You can just be like, well, I'm going to read Dowthat, or like a third of the House GOP conference is just going to be watching Tucker Carlson. I know in the old days, this people did read. I mean, I remember sitting in a Senate Finance Committee hearing, and I was the guy, sitting behind the senators, and like the senator was, honest to God, just reading the National Review and eating it up. Like, he just loved it. He was voracious about it. And that so there is like this demand to consume ideas on the part of powerful politicians. And if the think tanks have gone down in status, there's somebody else coming up. And I mean, to some extent, it's direct. Blogs have cut out the middleman a lot. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Would you expect that libertarians gain more influence there? Because if there's anything libertarians love, it's being an internet pundit and blogger.
Yeah, I mean, you have to say that the rise of YIMBYism is one of their big successes. And the rise of progress studies as a movement is another one of their big successes. And that really is sort of very social media driven, very blogger driven, at some academic input, to be sure. But
the fact that all that stuff has risen in status on a somewhat nonpartisan basis, right? There are people on the left and the right who are now in favor of like, oh yeah, the way we make housing cheaper is we actually build more houses, right? Gavin Newsom doing a version of this in California. Yeah. So yeah, and I think that's something you have to say wouldn't have happened before the age of social media. Partly because the YIMBY people and the progress studies people could make it look fun in a way think tanks never could. Think tanks always had to keep a kind of reified pseudo-academicness, right? We're all knockoff Brookings, right? But the memification of ideas that social media has made possible is really something that think tanks really could never adapt to.
A lot of staffers who go into Congress, they come from a poli-sci background.
Yeah.
And you say in your books that economists, like, if you have training in economics, you're going to vote better.
Uh-huh.
Should new congressional offices prioritize hiring people with econ degrees over poli-sci degrees? Or are those people just not showing up anymore?
I mean, really, the politicians should be hiring people with sociology and psychology degrees, right? They should really be trying to understand their voters. They should be understanding the people back home and what they want, right? A point that Tyler Cowen has made many times is that it's not a coincidence that Mark Zuckerberg majored in psychology when he was at Harvard before he dropped out. Because getting people to use your site is about understanding their minds, right? It's not about the software, right? And I think in politics, there's some version of, I need to be able to address what people want in order to be popular. Because what politicians want out of staff is, they do want raw execution skill at good writing and punctuality and showing up sober and all that kind of stuff, right? It's really important. But they also want someone who is going to help them be more popular back home. That's what they're looking for. So from the politician's crude perspective, I want you to go in as an economist and make the policy better. But that's not what the member wants. So.
Okay. All right, so I have three rapid fire questions and then one rapid question.
Yeah, okay.
So we're almost done. So
yeah.
Ready your questions. Do you vote?
Yes.
A lot of I know Alex Tabarrok has a whole thing where it statistically does not make sense for you to vote.
It's Gordon Tullock, yeah.
Is that Gordon Tullock?
Well, Gordon Tullock made it first in our sphere. Yeah.
I've heard.
Yeah. But Alex voted. He at least voted once since I've been a Mason.
Okay.
I'm not going to give it away.
All right.
You can look it up.
Okay, I will. I'll take that up. So do you think that's an overrated argument, then? Why should we vote?
You learn something about yourself from voting, and you meet a few people. You have a social experience. And for an academic economist in particular, you should have a social experience now and then. Okay. Another thing that you should do is especially if you're the kind of person who's studied GMU economics, is you should never try to get out of jury duty. Do not take pride in getting out of jury duty.
I got it.
That is a case where you are very likely to be a pivotal voter in someone's fate, right? So I served on a jury. I've had good friends who served on juries. There's always an important story you learn, and you're skilled enough at being good that on the margin everyone in this room is going to make the jury better.
I feel bad for skipping time.
Yeah.
Why is drinking wine viewed as being so sophisticated?
Because it tastes kind of gross. Yeah, I think that must be part of it. So I'm wearing my pin here, my introductory sommelier pin. So I was part of a midlife crisis. So it was great. Studied to be a somm, and I think that's the key. Is that it tastes kind of bad most of the time. You don't quite know what you're going to get. Unlike with beer, we have a kind of rough idea what it's going to taste like. There's so many that taste so different. So you have there's a lot of uncertainty to the experience. So, and it did take a lot of work to sort of create some certainty. I enjoyed studying it. So.
Do we over or underappreciate pets?
Pets?
Pets.
I think academic types underappreciate them because they give people what they want out of human experiences, but which we never get, which is fawning attention, love with a little bit of rivalry and tension that goes back and forth, a little bit of fighting that makes the drama work. And so it basically creates, I think it must create an enormous, utilitarians should really be thinking through like how much the better the world would be if more people in the rich countries had pets. Yeah.
Okay, so I lied. I have one more question. I really wanted to get this
Yeah.
out. So you pay a lot of attention to effective altruists and their movement.
Yeah.
You also do a lot of stuff regarding IQ.
Yeah.
And IQ is somewhat heritable to an extent.
To some extent, yeah.
To some extent.
Yeah.
Why do you think high IQ effective altruists haven't made donating sperm an EA cost area?
Oh gosh. Wow.
It makes sense. It's very low cost. Some people will even pay you for it.
Yeah.
You're spreading the good genes out into the world.
Now, this is a question I'm not prepared for, but I'm glad to speculate and offer. And, I mean, I don't know why they haven't done it, but it does seem as though this is something where the market has already taken care of this, where people who seek either eggs or sperm do, on average, prefer the kind of things that effective altruists would favor. They want, if a woman who goes to an Ivy League school feels like donating eggs, she knows she can sell them for quite a lot of money. I used to see the ads when I was dated a Smithy a long time ago, and I'm like, it's got to be true since then. So that may be something where the market's already efficient from their point of view. So, yeah.
Interesting. So final wrap-up question: where should Mason students and Mason Econ students specifically go if they want to enter public policy in the public sphere? What should they develop, and where should they be looking?
Well, being able to write great two-pagers is really crucial. And so any field where you're actually being judged on your writing in a concrete way is really great. So doing well in an intermediate writing class, maybe any kind of advanced creative writing classes. That's going to have a huge payoff, I think, in the real world. It'll keep your career going quite some time. And reading a lot of classic past speeches. So if you get a chance to reading old political thought really pays off there. When I saw good speechwriters in the Senate, they would often have collections of old speeches, classic political speeches sitting on their walls. Corbett's book, Classical Rhetoric, is still it's a great book to learn from. So any of the traditional courses in classical rhetoric are a great way to prepare. Learning how to formally make arguments using the methods that people would have studied in the Middle Ages, that had huge payoffs for me, and I think it has huge payoffs for others who've used them. So yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah, a course in rhetoric, reading a lot of political speeches, getting good at a two-pager. Yeah.
There we go. That's all we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So we can do Q&A now. Jacob has the microphone. If you want to go up, you can ask some questions. If not, I can keep asking questions. Just go up, make a line. Go for it.
Hello. Thank you for that talk.
It's recording.
Okay. From being in your class, I know you're a big fan of sort of a game theoretic way of thinking about politics. And I'm kind of obsessed with the idea of what lies in the tails of a lot of social phenomena, whether it's in finance or in politics. And on average, Trump being an example, I don't know how much of the predictions that were happening prior to his election were politically motivated, sort of to incentivize people to stay home or vice versa. But how well do you regard sort of the models that are being used to predict elections or to predict certain outcomes within the political sphere?
That's a great question. The problem that pollsters have found in the last couple of years, and again, Shore is my touchstone for this, but others have said the same thing, is that conservative Republicans are just less likely to talk to pollsters than they used to be. So you could imagine that in an earlier time, somebody who felt that the system didn't respect them, if they got a call from a pollster, they'd really want to take the call and say, like, let me tell you what I really think, right? But given the rise in distrust at the political extremes, now people just don't take that call. And so suppose you're a pollster and you're trying to adapt to this problem. do you want to just add a fudge factor to your forecast of saying, well, I'm pretty sure that like 2% of the people I called who hung up angrily were conservative Republicans, so I'm going to round it up. So I'm going to round my scores up. You can't do that. You don't want to artificially overweight your sample. You would like to try to find ways to ask the questions in a way that doesn't alienate people. But if there really is this not exogenous, but a hard to fix responsiveness problem from one political faction, what are you going to do? So this is a reason why I think that the betting markets, the electoral betting markets, are probably more accurate, are more useful this time around than they would have been in earlier years, because the betting market is their goal is to predict the outcome, not to accurately report their survey, right? And so the betting markets, for instance, have been a bit more optimistic than survey models in this election cycle on how Republicans will do. I think a similar thing happened in 2020, where even though Trump still lost, it was closer than the polls were showing earlier on, right? And again, it's this responsiveness problem. It's really hard there's very little incentive for people to, in the polling world, there's very little incentive to misrepresent, because you really do build your reputation on past experience. So one thing that keeps happening in the U.S. is that like it's fairly common for Fox News polls to be actually the most accurate, or extremely accurate, right? And even when it disfavors the team that you think Fox News is favoring, because that's a small enough world, and the predictions are visible, so the in-group can all assess you. So the incentive to be candid about your actual results is a strong incentive for truth-telling. This is, a more extreme version of this happened when the Sandinistas put themselves up for election in Nicaragua long ago. When the pollsters came to people who were against the Sandinistas, they just didn't want to tell the pollster that, right? And so an honest pollster is going to actually report that the Sandinistas are really popular. But once people get into the voting booth, they're going to be like, I want to get those guys out. So yeah, respondent honesty is a difficult problem to address. Great question.
Professor, thank you for this, speaking event also. My name is Russell Edwards, and just wondering, kind of similar to that note, how does the interdependency of culture, affect the credibility and reciprocity of expected behavior?
Oh yeah, this is great, because a question of, there are cultural differences in people's views of the norm of reciprocity, of trust and trustworthiness. It shows up in routine surveys, it shows up in experiments. It's, microeconomic theory often takes for granted the idea that we can just have perfect contracts, especially in your intro classes, like it's perfect contracts. And then you get to real life and you're like, I made an appointment, I signed a contract for someone to deliver this thing in 3 weeks, and then they never showed up. They say it'll be 2 months. Do I really want to take them to court? Probably not. The big answer here, most of the great research started off here in this field with studying Italy, right? The difference between northern and southern Italy. Where in the north, people are more trusting and more trustworthy, and in the south, there's less of that. And the beauty of it is, we as economists should see how rational it is for people to be untrusting and untrustworthy, right? It's perfect. Like, being trustworthy and trusting that's the Pollyanna stuff that economists aren't supposed to believe in. And yet we know that that's one of the things that greases the wheel of functional societies. It is one of the great mysteries why this exists. I hope that the 21st century, you and other people that you read in school will make great progress on this question of why cultures differ in trust and trustworthiness. If I had one change to make to this whole literature, I would try to get people to use the word trustworthiness twice as much as they use the word trust. The problem is not the lack of trust, the problem is the lack of trustworthiness, right? And when you try to explain why that is, if you're religious, you'd say the reason is the fall of Adam and Eve, and if you're a secular person, you should say it's the selfish gene, right? They're both secular and religious reasons to believe that people are going to be naturally untrustworthy. I don't know where the magic came from that made so many of us trustworthy, but those people who do it are rare treasures, and they are a standing critique of Homo economicus.
Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight, Professor.
Glad to be here.
So, with recent events in the Truist Party in England, and sometimes politicians in America, despite having a team of economists, sometimes make the wrong economic decision when choosing policy.
Yep.
Why do you think that is?
Yeah, economists are just one voice at the table, right? This is the thing, is that politicians are, I mean, in the case of Liz Truss and the Tories, the Conservative Party knew what they were getting with Truss. They knew she was in favor of this kind of policy, which was, you might say, just traditional Reaganite policies of the 80s. So, so Truss was delivering on what she was expected to do, right? So, so one reason they don't listen to economists is because what we're saying is not what they think is going to help them win elections. And their goal is to win elections, not to have the economy be successful 5 to 20 years from now, right? Sometimes those things are correlated with each other positively, but a 0.2 correlation, a 0.2 correlation and $4 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks, right? So, yeah, good economic policy is just one of their issues. And in Truss's case, politicians seem to be limited in the space of policy options they think they can choose from. And those are set by some element of what has been on the menu in the past, because they're trying to solve the same coordination game that I've mentioned before, right? Like what would it be, 300 or so members of the Conservative Party in Parliament have to agree on what we're going to do. And to get 300 people to agree on ideas, that means you're going to be reading off a very short menu, right? And they tried out this sort of mushy neoconservative stuff for a while under Boris Johnson, which is, like a little dose of Trumpy stuff, a little dose of European national conservatism. And when that failed, I think they decided they're thinking in terms of marketing in a level that economists don't usually. They were thinking, what will our brand be publicly? And they went with a nostalgia brand. And that nostalgia brand got judged very harshly by the markets. It's possible that the market also judged that they just wouldn't be able to pull it off. So, yeah, hundreds of politicians solving a coordination game. That's a difficult game that I don't want to have to solve.
That's why there's leadership.
Yeah, yeah. I think Rishi Sunak has these sort of, he has the ability to build focal points in a way that not a lot of recent politicians have.
So thank you, Professor, for this time. Earlier you said that if you support democracy, you should be happy that politicians abandon their ideals to please the voters. So what would be your definition of a good politician then? What do you think a good politician is? Is the one that please the voter, or the one that actually do like a good job for the country, I guess?
That's a great question. I want the second. I want somebody who does a good job for the country. And I think of this in a very argument that Tyler Cowen would make, which is that we want somebody with a low discount rate, a low social discount rate, somebody who places a lot of weight on the distant future. And I personally want a politician for my country who will place a lot of weight on people who are outside my country, right? Like, I'm just enough of a sort of broadly effective altruist that I think, I care about the long term. I'm a long-termist. And I think prudent people should too. The whole planet matters, not just us, right? So I don't want the entire world voting on American political outcomes, but the entire world has an interest in American political choices. And I hope that if you're ever working in a White House, I hope that at least privately in your secret heart, you are thinking, how can I steer this policy ever so slightly so that it makes the entire world better off? Great question. Shall we call it?
We can. We'll do. Do you have a question? Okay, so last question. You get it. You got one more? All right, two more, and then we'll call it.
Professor, in your opinion, what's the next big innovation in policy creation or policy adoption?
I do think that there is real hope for pro-technology policy toward basically less risk aversion in policy and more risk-taking in policy. The fact that California and to some extent the Germans have decided to keep nuclear power plants open that were already successful open, this seems to be a generational shift where your generation and people just a little bit older seem to be much less concerned about like the possible tail risks of technological innovation and much more worried about the foregone opportunities of lost innovation. So basically the hippies of the 60s and 70s set us back a lot when it came to being willing to try things out. And your generation, the people just a little older, seem to be coming into power and saying, yeah, let's try out new stuff, like as long as it's not totally stupid. So I think that's, a lot of this seems to be happening at local levels and state levels. And it'll take maybe 10 years for politicians at the national level to wake up to that, partly because it'll be people who work in the governments in states to ascend into power and get used to it and realizing, oh, I did this and it didn't destroy my political career. Yeah.
Does that make you a little scared for AI? Because that's a pretty massive tail risk.
Yeah, I mean,
becoming more liberal tail risks.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out how worried I should be about AI. So,
I'm usually pretty scared after I talk to AI people. So
yeah.
I don't talk to AI people.
Okay. Yeah.
That's my way.
Okay. So to your earlier point, someone brought up Liz Truss, and you spoke. Your answer to my question mentioned the betting markets, right? And I don't know if you saw this, but when Liz Truss hit sort of the crisis point, the betting market in England put up a head of lettuce. And
yes.
You saw that?
Yeah, that was great. Yeah.
A head of lettuce and her picture, for those of you who are
yeah,
not...
classic British tabloid.
Yeah, and they had a live YouTube feed to see who would outlast the lettuce.
The lettuce or Liz
the
Truss.
lettuce, yeah, exactly. And
yeah, the
and
lettuce won.
The lettuce won within like 3 days.
Yeah.
So, haha. My question is, you're a big fan of the median voter theorem.
Uh-huh.
And there's another member of GMU, Brian Kaplan, who's written a book discussing the myth of the median voter.
So myth of the rational voter.
The rational, yeah. Is it rational voter?
Myth of the rational voter, yeah.
Okay, all right. Good. Do you... okay, then my question is moot then, because I thought I haven't read his book, but
it's a great book. I really recommend it.
I thought he was saying that the median voter theorem is actually a myth.
No, his story there is that the median voter does shift things and is important. But what he's rejecting as a myth is the view that the median voter is well informed, that the person is rational. Right. So there's a big strand of political science that somehow went down this rabbit hole of arguing that voters were extremely rational through a sort of invisible hand story. And it was, you might think economists would go for that, but it turns out that Brian Kaplan made a very persuasive case that the median voter is fairly poorly informed. So really only starts paying attention to politics about a month before the election on average.
Right. Cool. Thank you. All right. Thanks. Well, that's that. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.